noite, tudo bem? Roda número 51 e estamos aqui com Patrick Grenade Goodman, que é a alcunha dele, né? Eu vou falar em português, depois em inglês, só para ele acompanhar. Então, ele é um piloto de helicóptero, ele é um Tenente Coronel aposentado da Força Aérea Americana e eu tenho trabalhado com ele nos últimos 3 anos. É um cara com muita experiência, um cara bastante interessante e eu acho que vai valer a pena essa roda. Estou muito feliz dele estar aqui. And that's it. Pat Grenade Goodman, I've been working with you like 3 years now.
Mm-hmm.
And I've heard a lot of stories. We've gone out a bit. I think half of it is lying, but the rest seems pretty impressive by itself. And so I think you're going to share a lot of experience. People are very curious. You're a retired Lieutenant Colonel, especially the rescue helicopter thing. That's the part I'm most interested in hearing about. So I hope we'll have fun. This is Roda de Conversa number 51. Pat, thank you very much.
Thanks.
You're free at home. It's your show now.
Thank you. Well, honored and very humbled to have a group from a foreign nation show up and want to hear my story. So it's very humbling. As Z said, I mix in a lot of my own history when I teach, but to sit down and just talk about me is actually a very different feeling. So I'll get rolling, trust me. I can do 8 hours a day by myself teaching. I promise we won't be here 8 hours tonight. It'll be a lot shorter than that, but thank you all for having me, and Z, thanks for the last 3 years and for your friendship and for inviting me tonight. So, as he said, start with, who you are, and I think it defines all of us. Where you're from just stays with you for a long time. And I find that as I get older, as I get farther on in life, the history and my roots get more important. And so I'll tell you all a little bit about me. I grew up in upstate New York, which you've all heard of New York City. I'm at the opposite end of New York State from New York City. And to give you an idea the size of my town, I'm looking around the room, there's maybe 20 of us. There were 32 kids in my graduating class from high school, 32. So I came from a very, very small town, maybe 400 people total. I'm imagining there's more people in like this city block than in my hometown. And it's still the same way today. I go back to my hometown. I'm very blessed that my parents are both still alive. And I go home often to check on them. They are in their 80s now, and you begin to feel a responsibility to take care of your folks when they get less and less capable of doing it themselves. And so I spend more time now in my hometown than I have in the past 30 years. So I grew up, you all have a pretty famous river in your country. I grew up on the banks of the Hudson River, which if you've been to New York City, you know that's the big river that goes through New York City. It's also famous for that's where John Sully Sullenberger put his airplane in the Hudson River when he hit birds and the engines quit. That's the same Hudson River. And so I grew up on the banks of the river, played a few sports in high school. I played tennis and soccer predominantly, a little bit of basketball, but was probably more into school and grades than anything, and girls. And so I came up with, I would say, we never wanted for anything, but we never really had anything either, if that makes sense, right? I never went to bed hungry, ever, but the first time I ever got on a jet airplane was to go to the United States Air Force Academy to college. We didn't go on big vacations. If we went anywhere, we drove. And my mom and dad started out literally with nothing. And today, you know, they're very comfortable in retirement. But we really didn't have much when I was a kid. And one of the reasons I went to the Air Force Academy is it was free. You go to the Air Force Academy and they actually pay you a little bit of money to go to school, as opposed to you having to pay to go to school. And I remember one day saying to my dad, "What did you do with the money that I saved you by going to the Air Force Academy?" And my dad looks at me and he goes, "There was no money. If you didn't go to the academy, you probably weren't going to college," right? And so my next door neighbor happened to be the guidance counselor in school, and he kind of hooked me on the Air Force Academy, and I went thinking that I would be a fighter pilot, and I actually thought I would go in the U.S. Navy from the Air Force Academy. There's a path that every year a few people from the Air Force Academy go to the Navy and to the Army, and a couple people from West Point, you know, the Army Academy, they go to the Air Force and the Navy, and I thought I would go to the Navy. And this is even before Top Gun.
So you're their inspiration. So Maverick was inspired on you.
What's that?
Maverick was inspired by you.
Yes, Maverick was inspired by me.
Okay.
And so I had a poster on my bulletin board of an F-14, and I wanted to go fly F-14s for the Navy. And so when I was a freshman, we had sort of an unfortunate, very unfortunate and sad thing happen. One of my classmates went hiking at the Air Force Academy, and he fell off the mountain where he was hiking. And he didn't come back to his room when he was supposed to. And so I ended up on the search and rescue team looking for him as a basically 18-year-old cadet at the Air Force Academy. And I grew up in the woods, right? 400 people, there's a lot of trees, not a lot of people. So very comfortable in the woods with a map. And so I was one of the folks that was looking for him, and we didn't find him the first day. But on the second day, we kind of knew where he had to be because we knew where he wasn't. And we're like, we know where he's not, so the only place that's left is this place here. And the only way we could get into that place was either hike for 7 hours, or we could take a helicopter. And so I sat in the helicopter, just about like this, with the doors open, kind of like the windows are right here, and we took off. And a female Army warrant officer and her crew flew us up the side of the mountain and put us in a spot where we could hike and find this guy. And we found him. Within an hour, we found him, right where we had sort of predicted it would be. And that helicopter ride literally changed my life. I was like, man, this is amazing.
Forgetting the F-14.
Yeah, forget the F-14, right? And so this is 1982 still. This is the fall of 1982. Top Gun still hasn't come out. And, you know, from that moment on, I wanted to be a helicopter pilot. And the path wasn't really easy. I am not the most military person in the world, and I'm not the smartest person in the world. So I didn't rank very high in my class at the Air Force Academy. And so when they picked 25 people to go to Air Force helicopter flight school, I was number 27. So it was like, okay, I'm 27 of 25. you know, it's kind of like, okay, I guess I'm going to be a fighter pilot after all, because if you can't get into helicopter school, what do they do with you? They send you to fighter school, right? And so, well, you go to flight school, and then who knows what you get out of flight school. You could get a fighter, you could get a air refueling tanker, a bomber, transport aircraft, but there was a special school for helicopters. And so I'm 27 out of 25, and all of a sudden, one of the guys decided, I don't really want to be a helicopter pilot. So now I'm 26. So you don't want to root against anybody, right? So what happened with number 25 to make me to the next guy? Really, really smart dude, one of my classmates, and he gets picked up for a Rhodes Scholarship in England. That's how smart he is. So he goes to a Rhodes Scholarship, and I am now 25 of 25 to go to flight school. And that was it. Just 2 people didn't go, and I made it into the top 25. I like to say I went in as number 25. I came out as a distinguished graduate, and so helicopters actually was very easy. I grew up running heavy equipment like bulldozers and excavators, dump trucks, front end loaders. That was what my father did for a profession, was run heavy equipment. And so not only was there always heavy equipment around our house, but my father would go in the summertime to work on big projects, and he would take me as a little guy with him. And this is back in the days when you could trust people. And I would go with my dad, and he would literally hand me to a truck driver, and I would ride around in the truck for maybe an hour or 2. And then the truck driver would be like, hey, I gave Pat to the loader guy, right? And so Pat's on the loader, riding around with a loader guy. In this day and age, the rules would never let you do that anymore, right? It's too unsafe and all of that. And so I kind of grew up running heavy equipment, and when I got to helicopters, I found it to be very easy to fly helicopters. And so I came out, I went to my very first assignment, which was in Cheyenne, Wyoming. Cheyenne's claim from a military standpoint is that it's one of our strategic missile bases. And we use helicopters to provide security when we do operations out in the field. And so our primary mission was to fly security. I usually had 4 big bad Air Force security force guys in the back with big weapons. And our job, if needed, was to deploy those guys if we needed to. Our secondary mission was to do rescues. And so this is now 1987. Top Gun was in 1986, so it's over. They didn't miss me, apparently, in the Navy. And so I'm at Cheyenne, Wyoming, flying helicopters. Lots of bad weather, lots of lost hunters, lots of people who would get very, very sick and have to get flown to the biggest hospital.
So it wasn't Maverick that inspired by you, but Schwarzenegger, get to the chopper.
Yeah, there you go. That's right. That's right. You will also find one of my things that I'll tell you about is that I've probably only watched maybe 10 movies in my whole life.
Really?
I don't watch movies.
Really?
I don't watch them on the airplane for as much as I fly around. But I've probably watched Top Gun 2 5 times. It is one of my favorite movies. Of the 10 I've watched, it's by far my favorite.
Lady Gaga Woods.
Yeah, that's right. But I don't watch movies. So you're going to give me lots of movie references?
Okay.
And my wife would say, oh, he's not going to get that. That's for sure. So I do know the scene you're talking about, though. I haven't seen the movie, but I know the scene. So, and so it was great to be in the unit in Cheyenne. I have 33 total saves, 33 or 34 total saves. 31 or 32 of those were at my very first unit in about 4.5 years. And it's a big number for a unit like that to save that many people. And so I was just very fortunate that when bad things happened, I happened to be the alert pilot who, was the crew that was going to respond. And so that was some of the best missions. I have landed on roads in the middle of the night. I've landed on hospitals in the middle of the night. One of my favorite stories is we were landing in Denver, and we had a premature baby in the back in an incubator. And so we would load the entire incubator in, strap it down, and I had a nurse and a flight surgeon. And the nurse didn't normally fly with us. And so we're coming in to land on top of Children's Hospital in Denver. And it's a very small helipad. And I said as we were coming in, I said, whatever anybody does, don't get out the left door. So whether she wasn't listening, whether she didn't think about it, she opened the left door. And when she looked out, there's nothing there. Now there's a safety net, but in the middle of the night, you don't see it. She was just frozen in the door. The flight doc had to grab her and bring her back in, close the door, and say, this way, we'll go this way. So I've landed on a lot of the helipads in Denver, and it's challenging and rewarding to know that you're making that difference, right? You very rarely ever hear how it turned out, but that baby, if they survived, is like 37 or 38 years old right now, right? And so that's pretty cool to say that as a crew, we were able to do that. And so that's those are some of the best feelings that you can get when you're in the first responder business, is, to actually make a difference like that to somebody and save somebody who really shouldn't be here anymore, right? And so lots of those types of missions in Cheyenne. So I flew for about 15 years with just one short break. And my one short break was to go to Saudi Arabia and run a search and rescue program in the Middle East in 1997. And so I went to Saudi Arabia and did that for a year, directing rescue forces who actually went out and were on alert to pick up anyone who might get shot down or be separated from their unit or whatever. And came back to the United States, back to Cheyenne, Wyoming, actually, for my second time around, to a different unit, to a higher headquarters unit in Cheyenne. And then I moved from there to Colorado Springs, Colorado, which, for those of you who may not know, the United States Air Force Academy is in Colorado Springs.
Yeah, I went there.
Yep. Yeah, very pretty place,
Yeah.
right?
My cousin lives there.
It's a lot better to visit than it is to live.
It's like Rio de Janeiro here.
Yeah. It's a lot better to visit than it is to live. And so when I left Cheyenne and went back down to the academy, my family and I actually lived in a house on the Air Force Academy. And so in 1987, my son was born at the Air Force Academy Hospital. And he would go on, after all of these assignments in the Air Force and moving around with Dad, he would go on to graduate from the high school that was on the Air Force Academy. So I like to say he's probably one of 5 people in the world that can say they did that, because they don't deliver babies at the Air Force Academy Hospital anymore. So it was pretty cool to have started there and then have him graduate from there as well. So when I was at the Academy, I was the Chief of Safety for one of the bigger wings in the Air Force at Peterson Air Force Base. And while I was at Peterson Air Force Base, the space shuttle crashed in 2003. And my wing commander was one of the board members, one of the high board members for that investigation. And he called me, or his exec called me and said, actually I think it was the general actually called and said, can you go do this investigation for 60 days? And I'm like, of course I can go do this. One of my additional duties all through my career has been investigating aircraft crashes, helicopter crashes in the Air Force specifically. And so by this point, you know, I'm a major in the Air Force. I've done multiple helicopter crash investigations. And so they needed people to work on the investigation. So there were many military people who came together to do it. I was just one of them. And so 60 days became 264 days of being on the investigation team. And I was very fortunate in that the assignment that I drew as an investigator was all of the debris from the space shuttle. So that was all picked up out in Louisiana and Texas. It was transported on trucks to Kennedy Space Center in Florida into a gigantic hangar, and it was all laid out in the shape of the shuttle, and basically we put it back together in a sort of a two-dimensional way. And we used that layout to help us figure out what happened. And I was very much involved in that process, and very much involved in coming up with the final answer as to why the space shuttle crashed. That was almost 20 years ago. It was a little over 20 years ago in 2003. And last year, I had there was a documentary done on the space shuttle investigation, on the crash and the investigation, and I actually got asked to be in the documentary. And if you Google me right now, you can probably find me in that video from being on CNN and on British Broadcasting Corporation on BBC. So, what's that? Oh yeah, thank you. And so I got a chance to go on there and explain how we did it, right? And they did a very good job in the documentary of describing not only the mission, but the crash and the investigation as they went through. And so that, at the end of the investigation, the Inspector General at NASA asked me if I would come and continue to serve at NASA. So I was Lieutenant Colonel, technically still wearing a uniform, except my uniform became a suit in civilian clothes. And I worked for 2 years at NASA, helping NASA get the space shuttle back to fly again. And so I did that until 2006. And then I went to the Pentagon and helped spend American taxpayers' money in the Pentagon. Back to my roots, helping to plan and finance the Combat Search and Rescue Program of the United States Air Force. And so I started as a lieutenant working rescue, and I ended as a lieutenant colonel, the other end, building the capability so that we would have rescue forces in the future. And I love being in the Pentagon. It is a giant challenge to take money, and Z heard me say this today, one of the hardest things your government will ever do, or that my government will ever do, is take a guy like me of very average ability and turn them into a helicopter pilot. And so to take your sons and your daughters and your brothers and sisters and to create the Brazilian military out of your tax dollars and your people is an incredibly hard thing to do. And to be part of that in the Pentagon was really the highlight of my career. I loved flying. I dropped water on fires. I got to rescue people. But to be in the Pentagon and to move money around so that you knew in the future somebody was going to get rescued by an aircraft that you helped buy, that was really, for me, really the highlight of my career. So I left the Pentagon, I retired. I like to say I graduated finally from the Air Force, and I kind of lucked into teaching people how to do that work that we do in the Pentagon. And that's what brings me to Brazil. It's what takes me all over the world, is sharing with our most important partners how do you most effectively and efficiently turn your people and your money into the ability to defend your nation. How do you do that? And so that's what we did together today, was explain that to a group of senior folks in the Brazilian military. And I'm a strange guy that way, probably, that I have such a good time teaching those types of things to people, but it's a true highlight to come and talk to your military and share with them ways that you can do this and not make the same mistakes that we made at it, and help do it better and more effectively. And so that gets us to tonight.
What countries have you worked in, just so they have an idea?
So I didn't travel a whole lot when I was in the Air Force. I was predominantly in the United States. So I did Saudi Arabia, and then when I started doing this work, I started in Afghanistan. And I did Afghanistan, I did Libya, and then from there, let's see, in Africa, Botswana, in Libya, in South America, just Brazil, in the Indo-Pacific, Indonesia, Thailand, the Philippines, South Korea, and in Europe, Poland. And so I think that's most of them.
Indonesia, you mentioned?
In what's that? Indonesia, and then Saudi Arabia and Kuwait in the Middle East are the countries that I've gone and had the opportunity to work with them and do that. And then of course I've traveled to a whole slew of other countries. Australia and New Zealand are probably two of my favorites. But Cambodia, Thailand, to visit, trying to think of some of the others. My grandmother was a Canadian, so I kind of grew up, in Canada a lot of the time. I'm going with my grandparents to Canada, so obviously Canada.
Just a small footnote. He cannot say my name, so he calls me Z. Ele não consegue falar José Guilherme, então ele me chama de Z.
Z?
Okay.
I can pronounce Z.
Question.
Yeah.
How would you say that your group was affected by the 9/11?
So on 9/11, so first I'm from New York, right?
Yes.
So I'm from New York.
A lot of stuff.
I'm not a big guy to go spend a lot of time in the city. I've probably only been there once or twice. But one of the pictures I tried to find Z is doing air refueling in our helicopters when I was stationed with the New York Air National Guard, and the backdrop is the Twin Towers. That was in 1993 or 1992. And I grew up in an era flying when I took pictures with a camera that you had to send the film away to get developed, right? So I don't have digital pictures. I have real pictures you can hang on to, right? And when he asked me to do this, I never made it back to my parents' house to get any of the pictures. So you don't have any really good action pictures. But so I had flown in that unit. I'm a New Yorker, and I was on duty in Colorado Springs when it happened that day. And the first place that they were going to bring President Bush was to our Air Force Base, because we also had Cheyenne Mountain Operations Center. And if you're familiar with Cheyenne Mountain, it is built inside a mountain, and it's designed to survive any sort of an attack.
It's the NORAD?
That was the NORAD headquarters at the time. That's where they ran the NORAD mission from. And so they started to come our direction with President Bush, and then President Bush was going to have none of that. He's like, I'm going back to Washington, D.C. And so they took the president back to Washington. But what I think the impact of 9/11 was it reshaped the world in a second, right? And especially the United States, from the perspective, a lot of people died at one time, right? Certainly that's the case. But it changed the paradigm in the United States about using the military as an instrument of national power, right? We were very hesitant to have American casualties before 9/11. And if you think back to Africa in Mogadishu, and if you are, what's the movie? Black Hawk Down. Black Hawk Down, right? And so we pulled out of Mogadishu because we took those casualties. And we said, it's not important enough to lose American lives to do this mission. And after 9/11, we lost thousands of American men and women in Afghanistan and later in Iraq. And so it dramatically changed the paradigm of how we would use our military around the world, and what safety and security was going to look like in the future, right? And it changed every country. And so I think that's how it changed.
That's the major change of the rule.
That's the major change to me. As a military guy and growing up in the Cold War, it was a non-shooting war, right? And then suddenly on the 12th of September, it's a shooting war. And I never went to a combat zone with a weapon. I've been in combat zones, but it's always been unarmed. And so I have deep respect for the men and women that deployed, especially on the ground, because that's where the vast majority of our casualties were. And I think it, to me, it changes you in a way where you recognize that if you go to Arlington National Cemetery and you walk through section 60, which is where most of the folks who were killed in Afghanistan and Iraq are buried, there are folks who have died in combat, buried in section 60, who were born after 9/11. That young, right? 18 years old. I signed up and I agreed to die for my country when very few people were dying for their country. These youngsters signed up when they knew there was a chance they would die for their country. And to me, that's what changed. That's what changed me. Is that there were people knowing the consequences, still willing to defend the United States of America. And my nation owes them a lot. So. Oh, hey, way back there.
Yeah, I just like to see
Levanta e fala pouco mais alto, só para.
So my question is, You were saying about how strong the patriotism grew after 9/11, and my question is close to this for like the patriotic feeling of a country. We all know here on this room that the U.S. is a very patriotic country, and my question is how a non-military army can influence on this sentiment on people, because here in Brazil we have military. We used to
So
join
it's
the
a
army,
voluntary armed forces.
Yeah. I mean, I want to. My question is, how do you say a voluntary army?
Voluntary army.
How do you say a voluntary army can influence on the nationalism of a country?
I think one of the most powerful images where a nation thinks most about its armed forces is when you see them come home from combat with a flag over the top of their coffin, right? And those images are very, very powerful. It makes you very proud of those individuals, but it also makes you ask the question, are we doing the right thing, right? And certainly after 9/11, I think everyone would agree we were doing the right thing, right? We had to respond to those types of things, so patriotism is very high. But like all things, feelings eventually change, right? And you very much, as you settle into, year 5 of the war in Afghanistan, and then year 10, and then year 15, it very much, I think, there becomes a separation between the military and the people, because this has been going on for so long. And I think that we have a very distinct separation in my country between the military and the government, right? Our military cannot be employed in the United States. There is a legal term for that. It's called
Posse comitatus.
Posse comitatus, which basically says we don't use the active duty military in the United States. And if you see Army and Air National Guard folks being deployed in the United States, they work for the governor and not for the president. The president can activate them if he needs to, but we don't deploy the active duty military to provide security in the United States or to be a police force or anything else. We don't do that. Our military is an outward-looking military, and it's the police forces that provide all the security inside the United States. So I would say there's certainly a patriotism in the United States that we believe we mean well around the world. And, part of what our team does is to bring that to partners around the world, right? And and one of the reasons I agreed to do this is because I think it's important that Americans, when we travel abroad, tell people who we are. Because I think if you watch the news, you could think we were something else, right? And so every country has its way of looking at the world. Ours has always been very outward, but very proud of the United States and very patriotic. It's exactly how I would describe Brazil. It's exactly how I would describe Brazil. You are very proud, you are very patriotic, and I think, but in the United States, the Army really doesn't have an effect on that in any sort of a direct way. It's more that I think there's a connection between the population because we send our sons and daughters and husbands and wives and mothers and fathers, they go and serve. And I think that's where that comes from. But in an all-volunteer force, you can have the military get disconnected from society, right? Especially in bigger countries, like yours and mine, right? The military is such a small part of the population that many people forget about the military, right? And so, or they forget that people are serving unless they know somebody. And then they know somebody and now they're reconnected again, right? And so we recruit from all over the United States, just like you recruit from all over Brazil, because you want the support of the people of your military. And so I think as the military, we draw probably much more from our people than our people draw from us. So, I mean, I definitely felt it in my little town when I would go home.
So
everybody and his brother would be like, "Oh, thanks for doing what you do," right? And so. Yeah.
So you came from a very small city or town in New York, upstate New York. So how was it when you went abroad? How did that change your mind?
I think probably my first. I'm kind of slow to get things right. I think the first time I probably went to a big overseas city, the first thing I thought about was, wow, they build big buildings over here too, right? And I think if you stay in the United States, or you stay in Brazil, or you stay in your nation and never travel, you can think you're the only country that has it figured out, right? And what you learn, Z's mom, when you travel around the world is there's a lot of people that have it figured out, right? That's what you learn. You learn you're not the first person with a big idea. You think Brazil is the greatest country in the world. I think the same in the United States.
Yeah.
But we say that, but we go overseas and we're like, every nation should feel that way, right? Every nation should feel that way. Because that's where it comes from at your core, right? Is feeling that. And so I certainly feel that when I go abroad. But I think the way it probably changed me the most, Z, is that this feeling that I don't just represent, I represent my nation when I go. Not just literally, but figuratively, right? And when I talk to American audiences about travel and what I do and things, I try to remind them that every American is a diplomat, right? When you leave the United States, you're a diplomat. And how you act and how you treat people is super important. Same when you all go abroad as Brazilians, right? You want to leave an impression that Brazil is a great nation, right? And I feel that all the time, and I try to get people to kind of understand that. And because I think that's where I changed, was the inherent responsibility to make sure that the conversation in the world, if you came across Pat Goodman, I don't care what you think about me. I want you to think that the United States has great people. That's what I want you to think.
So even as kids, we were diplomatic personnel. We had this awareness that if we did something silly, it would be bad for our country.
Yeah.
So if you were kicked out of the U.S., which country would you choose to live? No money, no problems.
If it was today, having not seen all the countries in the world, I would probably go to New Zealand.
But the ones you've seen already, which one would you live, no problems at all?
New Zealand.
New Zealand.
And only because as you get older, you don't need quite as much chaos in your life, and there's a real lack of chaos in Brazil, or in Not in Brazil
No.
for sure. There's a real lack of chaos in New Zealand. We spent a couple of weeks there driving around the South Island, and very much like where I grew up, except with many more modern, people and great places and things to do and food and restaurants and all that stuff. So if you held me and said you got to go someplace, that's of the places I know about, that's where I would go.
Another dangerous question: where would you never live again?
I probably won't say that on camera.
Okay,
Just give
after
some
the
tips.
broadcast.
Yeah, when you said you went to the military academy, there was a SAT, or you had very good scores in high schools?
Same way that you get into any college is the way you get into the Air Force Academy, except with a couple of extra steps. It starts out with your SAT scores having to be good enough, and as you would imagine, there are only 1,400 students a year at the Air Force Academy. Same with sort of West Point and Annapolis, right? It's a very small number of students. At any given time, the maximum number of cadets at the Air Force Academy is like 4,400. 4,400. So it's super competitive to get in. Somehow I managed to get back. And you have to have the SATs, and then you have to get a nomination from one of our political leaders, whether that is a congressman, and those folks serve for 2 years and then have to be reelected. So your congressmen get 5 people at the Air Force Academy at any given time, 5 nominations. And then your senators, they're elected every 6 years. There's only 2 of those for your state. For congressmen, it's based on population. So for New York, I think at the time there might have been 27 or 28 congressmen. So they get nominations, 1 each year pretty much. Your senators get to nominate 1 or 2 every year. And so you apply to your political leadership to say, I want to go. And then they put together a team of people who will interview each student that wants to go and make a decision about should we send this person to the Air Force Academy or not. So first you have to get above the academic bar, and then you have to get selected to go. So both of those things have to happen.
If you haven't been nominated, you would have settled to Yale or.
I had 2 backup schools that I applied to. I applied to I applied to West Point and Annapolis both. I didn't want to do West Point. It was too close to home because I grew up just about 4 hours from West Point. I wanted to be farther away, and so I kind of landed on the Air Force Academy first, and that was just kind of where I wanted to go. I never even visited before I went to the academy. I had never seen the place when I showed up the very first day. And so I kind of ended up with the academy in that role. And my 2 sort of civilian backup schools would have been to try and get an ROTC scholarship, which is another way to have the military pay your education, but you go to a civilian school. And then once a week, you do your cadet stuff as opposed to every day. And so it would have been Syracuse and Cornell. And they were both New York schools, so my parents could get in-state tuition, and those were the 2 places I applied to.
And what made you a good helicopter pilot?
Growing up with my father running heavy equipment. Everything you do in heavy equipment is 2 hands and 2 feet. And everything you do in a helicopter is 2 hands and 2 feet. And except the only difference is, in a helicopter, I can go vertically. And an excavator doesn't get off the ground. It's just 2-dimensional. I can spin it all day long, but it's never going to take off, right? And so that was, I think that's how, I guess, that's how I got there.
She wants to know what you did in
Yeah.
Afghanistan, if you can talk about
Same
it.
thing I do here. Literally helping the Afghanistan government think about the military they were going to need in the future to defend their country.
The
So, go ahead.
interior government or the actual? The former or the
Well, they've
actual?
had numerous governments since I was there, but this was in 2011 and 12.
Yes.
So that was
After
under.
America.
No, we were still there.
We left.
No, we left in 2020.
Wasn't Biden administration?
Under the Biden administration.
Two
I was there almost a decade before that,
Yeah.
so it was right in the middle of our time in Afghanistan. Yep.
Uh,
It was
please.
part of a government effort to help the Afghan government stand up in all areas, right? Interior, military, foreign affairs, finance, all those things we were helping with.
Hi, I'd like to know if you could share some thoughts about your experience working here in Brazil in your position. What's your impression about the Brazilian military, and is there any challenge that you could see that could be improved? I don't know, maybe you can talk about maybe our borders. We have large borders, and with the sea on one side, the Amazon, and over 10 countries on the other side. Can you share any thought about this?
Yeah, it's obviously you're in a unique sort of position where you're the big country in South America, right? I mean, and you have a geographic challenge to just control that much border space, right? You have maritime borders, you have land borders. I think that's probably one of the greatest challenges that you all face. I absolutely love working with our Brazilian partners. I come here because I like working with your military and the people we work with. Very professional, very engaged with what we do. And so that is, I find that to be very rewarding to work with countries that are engaged that way. Like every military, yours has the challenge of how, with pressure financially across all aspects of your government, because everything is getting more expensive, how do we best use our talent and our resources to defend Brazil? That's the challenge that every country faces these days. And so I think they are very much recognizing that that is the challenge of the future. And how do you, sort of from a management perspective, how do you manage the military so that you can afford to defend Brazil, right? And definitely a different challenge here than other countries where there's a very existential threat, right? Europe has a very existential threat right now. Same in the Middle East. And so the challenge is, how do you know that you're doing enough without doing too much? And that's a challenge, because every dollar we decide to spend on defense is a dollar you can't invest other places, right? And so a lot of our work is just getting people to ask those type of questions. And your military is absolutely asking those types of questions. So yeah, definitely asking the right questions. The answers are much harder than the questions.
Right.
Yeah. The answers are much harder than the questions.
Vou perguntar em português aí.
Okay, I'll translate.
Okay.
Eu queria saber a história por trás do apelido dele, Grenade.
Ah, finally. What's the why grenade? Where did that come from?
So I have never had the ability to keep my mouth shut. And eventually, the call sign caught up with my personality. And I was actually at NASA in the very early days of the space shuttle investigation. And the board, all the senior people, thought that they needed a facility in Florida where they could meet if they had to go to Florida. And so they, on very short notice, like at 6 o'clock at night, told me to go to Florida. So we get an airplane ticket, and I get on a Southwest Airlines flight, and I fly to Florida. And by the time I get to the hotel, it's 2 o'clock in the morning. The next day, I wake up at 7 o'clock to go meet this individual, and he calls me and says, "Can we delay until 9 o'clock?" I'm like, hallelujah. I get another hour of sleep, right? And so I'm like, great, I'll meet you at 9 o'clock. So I get up, I go to the place where I'm going to meet him, and I pull in, and all of a sudden my BlackBerry, I had a BlackBerry at the time, and I'm like, okay. So I start reading, and it's like, Pat, it's from my wing commander. Do not do X, Y, Z. Do not do this. Do not do that. I'm like, wow. All I did was get out of bed this morning. I haven't even said anything yet to anybody, right? And so in the middle of everyone telling me to stop doing stuff I wasn't doing, one of my NASA colleagues, who had been a pilot in the Navy, sends an email that says, well, based on the amount of disruption that's happening this morning at the Kennedy Space Center, it's obvious Patrick Grenade Goodman has landed. And it's been that ever since. Across NASA, it stuck immediately. And so when I came back to the Pentagon, it came back with me. And it's very much from a personality perspective, if you think about a grenade, right? If you pull, you know how a grenade works? There's a pin and there's a handle. So long as you have the handle, you can pull the pin. So there's a few things you can do with a grenade. You can look at it, okay, there's a grenade. You can pull the pin on the grenade. You don't have to throw it. You can still put the pin back in, right?
Yes.
You can put the pin back in.
I didn't know that.
And then you can throw it. Now the thing about a grenade is, it's indiscriminate. If you throw one in the middle of this room, it doesn't sort people out, right? Good guys from bad guys, to include the person who threw the grenade. So my personality flaw is I'm the guy throwing the grenade. And I don't really care if I get hit too. And so that's where grenade sort of comes from. It's very much a personality flaw.
It's a good call sign.
It's a great call sign. I've literally run into people years after leaving the Pentagon who know me by grenade and don't know my real name. They just know my call sign. So it's not a bad thing to have a brand, as I like to say, right? So, yeah. That's all I got.
Tem outra pergunta. De uma pessoa que está assistindo online, que me pediu para perguntar, é meu cunhado, ele é bombeiro. Ele pediu para perguntar qual foi a missão que mais marcou a sua vida.
So her brother-in-law asked you what was the mission who marked you the most, the one you remember the most.
Fighting fires in California with my helicopter.
Whoa.
Yeah, by far. By far. I loved saving people, but from a flying perspective, it just wasn't that challenging. It's all the kind of rescue missions that I did were very, they were hard, but you weren't going to kill yourself if you did them. If you did everything right, you weren't going to kill yourself. Landing on a rooftop in the middle of the night is hard the first few times you do it. It's hard the last few times you do it, but it's not the hardest thing you're ever going to do flying. But when I got to California and we started fighting fires with buckets underneath the helicopter and dropping water, that was you can kill yourself at any given time right here. And so that was probably the most demanding flying, not just as a pilot, but as a crew and operating together. And the thing I probably loved most about helicopters was the crew aspect of it. And being the aircraft commander and the person in charge of the aircraft, to have someone basically sign a set of orders that says, it's your helicopter with this crew for the next 2.5 hours, that was a wickedly cool way to make a living.
She just said her brother is
He's a fireman.
firefighter.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yep. So I've dropped a lot of water on firefighters who are on the ground getting run over, and they're like, "We need water," you know.
When was that? When was that?
94 to 97.
Since 94, California has been ravaged by fires.
So one of the biggest fires I was ever on, and I'll give this to you in acres, was 106,000 acres. You can do the Google translation to what you want. At the time, that was like the 6th biggest fire that they'd ever had in California. And today, that's not even in like the top 50. And that was only 25 years ago, right? I mean, the scale of fires in California in terms of the damage they do and their size anymore is very challenging. You have whole air forces in California dedicated to dropping water.
You said 150,000 acres? You said 150,000
The fire that I was on was 106.
106,000 acres.
106,000 acres when it was all finished. But it was the Highway 20 fire, Santa Catalina, California. Santa Catalina? I may have the name wrong. I'll have to think about it. But since then, the fires have just gotten massive in California.
And every year, and almost every year, isn't it?
Oh, it used to be there was a fire season where there was a time period when fires happened and then they went away. And it's very much all year long anymore.
My question is also related about it because I work for the civil
I get
defense.
I'll get you.
I work for the civil defense, the national civil defense.
Oh yeah, cool.
Yes. So I was about to ask you about here in Brazil. Sometimes our Air Force helps us with extinguishing fires and some disasters.
Yep.
So, how many? If you have worked in disasters, and how many disasters have you worked with?
Besides your marriages.
Yeah.
Oh, come on!
That's right. I'm a great fan of marriage.
Don't delay my question. Come on.
In fact, I ran out of the house so fast, and I all of a sudden I look at my phone and I'm like, it's time to go. I grabbed my phone and didn't put on my wedding ring. So, disasters, not a lot. Remember, I was saying that the military doesn't normally respond inside the United States, but we can respond for disasters and things like that. My timing has just never been that I was flying when those types of events happen. But I had many colleagues that flew, like in Hurricane Katrina. They rescued thousands of people. They're pulling them off their roof of their house and stuff, right? And all those count as rescues because you need to get off the roof of your house. But
floods also?
That's what I'm saying. Katrina was a flood.
Oh.
After the hurricane, it was a flood.
Okay.
Yep, it was a gigantic flood. And thousands of people, hundreds of thousands of people in New Orleans displaced. And we've had disasters like that all over the United States where parts of the military respond. Our Air Force moves heavy cargo around the United States for FEMA, which is our Federal Emergency Management Agency. They do that all the time. So there's lots of ways we contribute. I never personally have been on one of those. In the back.
During firefighting or disaster handling, have you ever felt like any effort was hopeless?
One story. I was taking a helicopter from South Dakota to California in 1993. And we were in western Wyoming in an area where I actually had hunted, right? Like shoot an elk or a deer or whatever, right? And very familiar with the terrain and the weather. And we were flying along and we needed to get through the mountains. And we tried to go one way and the weather was bad. We came down another way and the weather looked perfectly fine. So we dropped down, coming through the mountains, and all of a sudden, it's a whiteout. And I'm like, we need to turn around. And immediately became obvious that turning around was not an option. You can never let it get hopeless. You just can't. So we got so low that I was looking through my feet, through the chin bubble, at the tops of the trees, and flying off of a 1 to 500 sectional that Jay will know about.
Okay.
We're flying low level off of a sectional map.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah, not perfect.
No, okay.
Not perfect. It's a very high scale map, and you're trying to navigate around bends in a river, right? And so my co-pilot was a guy by the name of Kurt Miller, and he was very new to helicopters at the time. But he did a magnificent job with the GPS and the map of telling me, hey, as soon as you see the low ground, go to the left, follow it to the left. And in the middle of this, there's snow everywhere, and the snow's starting to get on the aircraft, right? My crew chief was a guy by the name of Jimmy Brents. And Jimmy had been asleep in the back as we were flying along, just late. He's a civilian, not really part of the, quote, crew. And we were in open terrain. I really didn't need Jimmy. And so he had just laid down and was kind of napping in the back. In the middle of this, Jimmy wakes up. And he comes up and he gets in the jump seat right between me and Kurt. And he's looking out the window. He looks around. He doesn't say a word. He goes back to sleep. I'm thinking to myself, that's impressive, because I'm scared to death right now, right? So eventually, the terrain in front of us just keeps getting lower and lower and lower. And all of a sudden, we break out of the weather. And we're in the Grosse Pointe River Valley above Jackson Hole, Wyoming. You can look it up on a map. I'll show you exactly where we were. And when we came out of the weather, there were 3 hunters on horseback on the banks of the river. And we were so low, I could see them looking at us like, where did this helicopter come from? Because it didn't come out of that weather, there's no way. And yet we did. And that was the one mission in my whole life where I had enough time to think about they may not find us until spring.
How high AGL were you when you dropped out?
Probably 50 feet.
You're kidding.
50 feet.
Gente, tipo, 17 metros, que ele saiu das nuvens.
Right, just above the trees, the whole way down. If any higher, we couldn't see the trees. And I couldn't go up because of the snow and the icing.
I complete IMC conditions.
There were complete IMC. Just literally flying instruments and looking at the trees as to where to go. But I want to finish the Jimmy Brent story. So we get to Jackson Hole. Jimmy is up by now. He's looking around. The sun's out in Jackson Hole. This was just a snow shower, right, that we ended up in the middle of. So I said to Jimmy, I said, pretty impressive you go back to sleep. And he goes, yep. He goes, I looked around up front and decided I didn't want to die awake. I was like, amen, brother, neither did I. Neither did I. So, yep. So that's how we got out. Teamwork, right? And it's part of being in a crew aircraft. I could not have done that day without Kurt. And obviously Kurt needed me to fly the aircraft, right? So definitely a team effort. And if you were to find Kurt Miller somewhere in the world today and ask him what mission scared you the most, I'd be shocked if he didn't tell you flying with Pat Goodman. So, yeah.
Question about all of your missions, about your rescue missions. Do you had any casualties during your rescue missions? Like, I need to save these people and I couldn't.
Yeah.
And if yes, how did you manage to get over it? Because when you're dealing with human lives, probably, how can I say, you might have some problems like, oh my God, I should have done this, I should have done that. You maybe you tend to lock yourself.
Yeah, it's an awesome question.
Yeah. So how do you manage to get out of this, to get over this feeling, and keep going?
Yeah. So Cheyenne, Wyoming, the middle of the summer, thunderstorms coming in like they do here, and there's a car accident on I-25 near a town called Chugwater. And you can go to a map, Google Chugwater right now, you'll see it's on I-25 north of Cheyenne, Wyoming, and they call us to go on a mission. And we come in from our houses and immediately jump in the aircraft, and within 20 minutes we're taking off. And the mission is for a woman who was driving her car, not wearing a seatbelt, and single car rollover accident, runs off the road, car rolls over, she gets thrown out, life-threatening injuries, right? Yeah. And so we're all running, hurrying, starting the aircraft in a hurry, and so the last thing I said to the crew as we sat on the ramp was, okay, we're about to take off, and from this moment forward, we can kill ourselves doing this, right? Because up until that point, you're just going fast. Not going to hurt yourself going fast on the ground. But for getting to do stuff in flight, absolutely, right? And so we took off, and we headed north, and the weather is just worse and worse and worse, and it's a thunderstorm out in front of us. And all of a sudden, in the front of the helicopter, there is a gigantic bright blue fireball of lightning. And I'm like, we are done going that direction. And that's where the survivor is. And so we peeled off to the left, got lower, and off to the west, when I got lower, I could see daylight to the west. And we stayed low, and as we were flying over the ground, I'm like, what is down there? It was hail, like this deep on the ground. And we kept trying to find a way to get there. And the way you rationalize not being able to do it is that you're not really a rescue pilot until you say no. Because if the answer to every mission is yes, and you've never had to say no, you're not really a rescue pilot yet, right? Because a rescue pilot happens when you can't do it. When the challenge is too great for you and your crew, the weather is too bad, I've got 5 people in that helicopter. There's 1 on the ground. The worst thing I can do is kill 5 to try and save a person who we might not save anyway, right? And so there's a saying about, to die trying. And my personal view as a rescue pilot was, I will die trying when it matters the most. If I'm, when it matters the most, when I know that we have a chance of doing something. But when you know that the weather is you're just not going to make it. You have to live to fight another day. And there's just comes a point where you just have to say, we couldn't do it. We couldn't do it.
So you went back.
Yeah. Well, that and fasten your seatbelt.
It's like they say
Have
here,
you
the most
experienced post-traumatic disease?
Post-traumatic stress syndrome?
Yes.
I don't know that I would even know. I was probably crazy to begin with. I don't wake up, I never was in combat the way many of the folks with PTSD were in combat, right? And so it is definitely a real thing. I can remember waking up with dreams every once in a while of things that had happened, but it doesn't happen to me very often the way it does with people who had changed their lives, right? PTSD is a real thing, but I've never had that to any extent that I would ever tell anybody that I had PTSD. That's for sure.
Her brother that he's watching us right now. He wants to thank you and know and tell that how important it is to have air support. It makes the firefighter works way easier.
Absolutely, and we always say from the guys who fly and drop retardant or drop water, we are only there to help the guy on the ground. It's the only reason we're there. The guy on the ground and the bulldozer guys, right? Because they're in the middle of it. They are right there in the thick of it. And I have some awesome firefighting pictures that, unfortunately, they're not digitized, and so I don't have them. But man, I have huge respect for your brother on the ground. That is real work right there. So real work for sure.
You can get those photos for us in the future.
Yeah, there you go.
I wanted to ask you, actually go back to a question before. You said that the most perilous kind of mission is the fires.
For me, it was. For me, it was.
Yes, but what actually made this fire so dangerous to you? The smoke, the visibility?
Yeah, that's a good question. What makes it that way?
Yeah.
So the environment is very dynamic, right? Usually when you have fires going, you have winds, which are always challenging when you're low level, and you can't drop the water from high, right? You have to be about 100 feet with the helicopter. That puts the bucket at about 75 feet so that it hits the ground in anything other than just a mist, right? So it actually will put out the fire. So you have to operate in an environment that is hot. That's harder for your helicopter to generate power and lift. Windy normally, smoky, and so the visibility can change instantly. I was flying with one of my younger guys one time, and we came out of getting water, and we start up to make a turn, and all of a sudden he turns, and I'm like, oh no, don't do that, because we're going right into the smoke. And when you go into the smoke, it's just like being IMC. It's like, now there's no way to get out, right? Because you can't just randomly descend. You don't know where the terrain is in front of you, right? So the most important thing you can do in fighting fires is to make sure that you can always see where the ground is, and keep yourself clear of the terrain, because that's predominantly how mishaps happen, is people fly into the terrain that they're supposed to be dropping water on, right? So mechanical failures is another one, but flying into the ground is the biggest. And so that changing weather dynamic, multiple helicopters around, air tankers on big fires, that was really the challenge. It challenged you listening to the fight, right? As I like to say, because you're listening to the controllers talk to you about where everybody else is. These are planes that circle up above. Multiple planes. Multiple aircraft.
It makes the smoke even more dangerous.
And so, well, it just, you've got to listen, you got to build the picture in your head, then you got to have a picture on the ground of what not to fly into, you got to stay out of the smoke, you actually got to make your load effective and put it on the fire, right? It's not just random where you drop, so you got to do all those things at one time. And for me, that was the most challenging flying bit I ever did in my career. And it was constant for hours on end. I mean, you flew 2 hours of that, you were just cooked. And so you land, you get gas, you know, something to drink, and you go right back at it. And you might fly 6 hours that day on a fire. And we did a lot of initial attack, which means we would be like the first or second helicopter there. And so very dynamic when the fire is just starting, because you're trying to figure out where's the fire going, what houses are threatened. I've dropped water on people's houses.
And actually the terrain is usually a difficult kind of terrain when they use aircraft, because the firefighters cannot get there. So we use the aircraft to try to get nearer the fire.
To get a line around it and slow it down. Yep, exactly right. And so what we're doing is the air tankers are laying in big lines of retardant, and especially if you watch any YouTube videos now with these very large air tankers, they call them VLATs, and they can drop, 3,000 gallons of retardant. I had 500 gallons of water, max. These have, I think the bigger tankers have like 9,000 gallons, or 9,000 pounds or whatever it is. We were nowhere near that. I'm dropping like a glass full of water on the fire. They're dropping, buckets full of water on the fire. And so we very much are tactical, helping guys like your brother, like right in close with their working a line, and we're trying to keep them protected and keep working that line out in front of them. But very, very challenging, but very rewarding to see that you save houses of people that, were in the line of the fire from no fault of their own. Yeah, very cool. Yeah, good question.
Which kind of helicopters did you get to pilot?
Yeah, so there you go. That's a good question. So I started out in TH-55s, which was the Army's little small trainer. And if you look it up, it looks like a toy helicopter. So we started in TH-55s, then we went to the Army's single-engine Huey, and that's where I did finished the rest of my Army training, because the Air Force does helicopter training with the Army, at least for the first 9 months. And then the last 6 weeks you go and do an Air Force course, but you're still flying Army helicopter. And then I got to the twin engine Huey, the N model Huey. I loved flying the N model Huey, just loved it. Nothing automatic on it at all. If you didn't fly it, it crashed. That was all there was to it. No autopilot, no flight control, you know, hold or anything like that. No glass cockpit, none of that stuff. It was every single minute in the end model you had to be flying, and it by far my favorite. And then I flew a short tour in the Air Force version of the Black Hawk, the combat rescue helicopter. Not very many hours, and never did any combat rescue. And then I back to the N model, and then to the Air Force H model, which is the Air Force's single-engine helicopter. But I finished up on the N model was my last assignment, and very happy to fly the N model for my last assignment. And as a little note, I did my FINI flight, my last flight in the Air Force in 2010. And my last flight was down the river in Washington, D.C., Route 1 to Route 4, which is where the Black Hawk and the airplane collided over the Potomac River. That was where I did my final ride in an Air Force helicopter, was that exact same route down through there. But that was my last time flying in an Air Force helicopter, 2010.
That was my next question. Once you're bitten by the aircraft bug, the air bug, it's a hard thing to leave. So do you still fly? Do you have like recreational flights? You called your buds? And,
yeah, great question. And I have a standard answer because I've been asked it a lot, right? And I didn't so much struggle with rescue missions and how you get over that and stuff. What I struggled with was, what am I going to do for the rest of my life, right? As a pilot, you come to a point where my conclusion was, I loved to fly, but I did not live to fly.
Okay.
If that makes sense, right? I love doing it, but I didn't want to do it for the rest of my life. I kind of figured the only thing left to do was sort of kill myself. And because it was a crew airplane, that meant there were other people going with me, and I just wasn't going to do that. But I mean that in a way of, I had done so much good flying in my career. It was just sort of like, I think I'm done making a living with my hands, and I want to make a living with my head. And that was why I went to assignments that weren't flying, and then I ended up on the shuttle investigation, then I ended up in the Pentagon, then I ended up doing this work. I've never regretted for a second. May 24th, 2001 was my last operational Air Force flight. I don't count my FINI flight because that was just a buddy of mine doing me a really good favor right at the end of my career, and get me one last ride, as Maverick said, right? One last ride, baby. Except we brought it back. We didn't run it to the red line. And so, very, very much no regret ever with my last time I flew an Air Force helicopter. I remember it clearly. I can tell you exactly who I flew with. I can tell you exactly what we did on the flight, but no regrets. None. Not a one. Yep, not a one.
Using this question, do you have on your head the feeling where you thought, okay, this is definitely my last mission, and if yes, how was your feeling during that last mission?
Yeah, so that's May 24th, 2001, right? And you get to, on your FINI flight, you get to sort of choose who your co-pilot's going to be, right? Because on a FINI flight, it's just you and the co-pilot. And my co-pilot was a great woman by the name of Anne-Marie Contreras. And Anne-Marie was one of the greatest pilots I ever had the opportunity to train as a young person, and just had an incredible amount of natural ability as a pilot. And I wanted to fly with her for my last ride, because what we were going to do was some low level, and I think we did some formation in there maybe, and then we came back and we did auto rotations. So my last maneuver in an Air Force helicopter was a left 180-degree auto rotation, which we kind of say in the end model community is the hardest maneuver you'll do in the helicopter.
Sure.
And I rolled up on final and just said, here we go. And the thought as I rolled the throttle off was, this is the last time, don't screw it up, right? Don't crash on this one. But that was the thought. But I think I was definitely to the point where I was ready to move on. I had a great next assignment coming up that I was really excited for. And I was going back to work for a general that I'd worked for in the past. And so it was very much a feeling of mission accomplished, is what it was. And then not kill yourself on the last 180. But I definitely remember hovering in for probably the last time, right? And you hover into the pad, and I just kind of sat there for a minute in a hover, just feeling the aircraft, right? Because I flew by feel. I mean, the airplane talks to you, right? And helicopters talk loudly. And I just sat there for a second, and I just felt it in my hands and in my feet, and I was finally like, all right, I'm good. Put it down, roll up the flight idle, shut it down for the last time, and then I'm hosed down with a fire truck, you know? So, that's it.
You were saying that it's now 24 years. No. 2001.
24 years on active duty. My last flight was May 24th, 2001.
Almost 24 years.
So it's been 24 years.
24 years.
The last time.
Thanks for reminding me, man.
No.
I appreciate the reminder that I'm really old. That's even longer than I was on active duty. I didn't realize that day was coming up. Yeah.
So let's not talk about the numbers. I was thinking about, is there, or would you, two questions actually, is there a situation, like an actual situation that would make you go back, like a really big, huge event that people were, I don't know, were out of pilots, they needed new pilots, or anyone they could find, or actually, I don't know, a kind of war situation, or I don't know. So would you do it? And second, do you think that it would be like, I don't know, like ride a bicycle again?
Yeah. So I'll answer the second question first. When I did my Finney flight in 2010, that was like 9 years later, right? And I remember sitting on the helipad, cranking the helicopter up, and starting it. And I can still give you the start sequence. I still can do it in my head, right? I can start it in my head. And so we're rolling the throttles up, and we're sitting there, and it's that feeling of, I'm feeling it in my hands and my feet, right? And I remember the thought. I didn't remember it being so violent. Man, it's a lot less violent when you're 22 than when you're 42, right? Or in my case, I guess I was like 45. And I'm like, man, this is a young person's game doing this right here, right? And I remember what my Finney flight did was just confirm my decision that I quit at the right time, right? I felt like, you feel like you win the World Cup, and I'm not hanging around to do this again, right? This is it. I've done everything, and I just want to be done. And so, so that's, would I go back? When you retire, you get paid retirement pay because they can bring you back. That's why you get retirement pay. You are still, quote, available to the president.
It's like the reserve here, the military reserve.
Right. You could still be brought back. And I think if they brought me back and told me they needed me to serve, obviously I'd be honored to serve my country again. It wouldn't be as a pilot. There's younger guys that could go fly. I'd go and do whatever desk job they needed. Help run the Air Force rather than, fly the Air Force type of a deal.
Yeah, my brother through the WhatsApp asked how the pay is. Was it a good pay, the salary?
I don't know how to put that in perspective, right? What's good for some people is not good for other people, right? I don't know how to put that in perspective. And if I told you a number, it's a number for my country, not for your country, right? So the number really doesn't matter. The pay for me was to wear the United States flag right there. Beyond that, I just wanted to be able to take care of my family and maybe put some money aside for when I got out of the Air Force. And certainly having a retirement was an incentive, but it wasn't really why I stayed around. In fact, I thought about getting out when I was, when I was eligible to get out the first time, which was like 8 years into my service. But the money was good enough to keep me in the Air Force. See, let's put it that way. Yeah, let's put it that way.
We have a few more questions here from that firefighter.
From the firefighter guy.
If you have a notion of how many flight hours do you have?
3,270. 3,270 point something, but I don't remember what the point is.
If you, in any moment of your career, you didn't want to climb up in your career and become a general.
Yep.
Yeah.
So in 2004 or 5, I made the decision that I did not even want to be a full colonel in the United States Air Force. And when I took the assignment at NASA to go work on the space shuttle, it wasn't really a career-enhancing move. And I had already sort of decided that I was going to do what I wanted to do, and whether I made general or got promoted, I didn't care. I've always answered that question by saying that I always identify as a pilot, and I will always be a pilot. I'm very proud of being an Air Force pilot. My rank had nothing to do with my ego. My ego was plenty big enough without being a general. And so I never felt like I had anything to prove. And so when I told the Air Force that I wasn't going to be in 06, I was very happy to stay in the Pentagon and do the job that I had. It was very rewarding, very fulfilling. It was taking care of my Air Force, not my Air Force, people's Air Force. And very much what I wanted to do was to stay there and continue to do that work. And if I would have been promoted, they would have immediately moved me into some other job, and I would have been much less happy. So, okay.
Yeah. How was the Pentagon, the infighting, and how much of it was, because we understand it's kind of frustrating, it's back and forth, and not a lot gets done sometimes.
Yes. The answer is yes. I think it's everyone doing what they think is right. Everybody that shows up in the Pentagon every day believes they're doing the right thing. Just like shows up in your MOD every day, they're doing the right thing. By definition, those right things collide sometimes. What I think is right, or what the Navy thinks is right, they're not pointed in the same direction, right? And so part of what we call the sausage making is to get everybody sort of pointed the same direction, and it's very, very difficult to do. But to me, it was part of the reward of being in the building was trying to solve those really hard problems. That was the reward of being in the building. Really, and I love that type of work.
We were saying about the Pentagon, and a thought occurred to me. Nowadays, the war with technology and drones and all this kind of new technology, AI, how do you think that the role of the Air Force will be impacted with this new technologies, these drone technologies? Because it's not like piloting effectively an aircraft. So
yeah. I think technology has always changed warfare, right? It's always done that. And the speed at which technology is changing, Moore's Law, right? Every 2 years we kind of double the computing power type of a thing, is Moore's Law, if I understand Moore's Law. We're in for a period of rapid change. And everything I hear coming from the Pentagon's leadership, they're focused on that. I don't know what the answers are to that, but I'm certainly happy to hear them talking about those as challenges that we have to be dealing with. I don't do so much on the technology anymore, so I'm not as up to speed on, you know, how it's all being used, besides watching, you know, how they're doing it in Ukraine, right? And
that's
how they've revolutionized warfare in Ukraine. I think I saw something the other day where they ran the first integrated joint attack that was all done by drones, on the ground and in the air. And that's where we're probably headed, obviously, right? The scale is going to change, for sure, to where you're not just across land borders, but you're going to be intercontinental, right? And that's going to change the dynamic for a nation, especially like Brazil, that really doesn't have a huge threat today. You might very well have a much larger threat in the future, right? That you have to think about. So
we don't have drones, actually.
Right.
I was reading an article about it. Brazil doesn't have fighting drones.
Vans, we call them.
Vans, yeah. So
that's part of sorting out, you know, the challenge for any military is fight tonight, defend your nation tonight, and think about how you're going to do that in 5 years, and 10 years, and 15 and 50 years, right? And it's the challenge to think in so many different time slices is one of the biggest challenges governments face and that militaries face, is how much is enough today so that we can invest in what we need tomorrow, right? Because the threat is changing.
Yeah, and there's always the budget problem and where to put it. I'm a nerd guy, so
that is the budget. The budget problem is exactly as you say. It's not that there's not enough, it's where to put what you have, right?
Exactly.
Because the budget is the budget. It's what you have. What do we do with it?
Because I'm a nerd guy, I played a game called Civilization.
Yeah.
So if there's a
SimCity 3000, right?
Exactly. Wars. And there are some civs. If one of them does not invest in military at all, gets very back, it becomes a threat to that nation. In some sense.
Yeah, it's the challenges going forward in how do we invest over time, with everything changing as fast as it is, and as things get more expensive at the same time. We're going to have to figure out how to bring the cost of things down so that you can have the same capabilities or greater capabilities even, but hold that cost at a level where you can afford to actually do it. So it is one of those wicked problems, as they like to say, right? And it's a wicked problem.
As a Brazilian, that's interesting because we always had the USA to protect us. USA were always the policing force.
They were the Western Hemisphere policemen first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Japan never had a military until 10 years ago, and she's right there
now
near
they're
China.
They need one, right?
And US were protecting them. Now there is when you say threat, I can only think of that. That maybe now the USA will not stand up to protect their partners like they were before.
And I think definitely the world is expressing what you just expressed, right?
Mm-hmm.
and I don't know what the administration will do. Obviously, and I can't predict the future. But I think definitely acknowledge the world is feeling that way at the moment, right? But it'll sort itself out. I have confidence that it will sort itself out in a way that is good for everybody, hopefully. That's all I can do is root for it, because I don't have anything to do with it.
So she has a question, and what's the perspective of the force, the services, the armed services in the U.S. with this new administration?
I have no idea. My classmate, one of my classmates from the Air Force Academy, is the Chief of Staff of the Air Force, General Dave Allen. I have no idea the amount of pressure that Dave is under, but I did see him in the White House the other day with President Trump and Secretary Hegseth. Dave's a great guy, and he can definitely handle the position that he's in, but I have no idea the perspective of the services on the administration. Having been in the Pentagon for multiple changes in administration, my perspective was I signed up to support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America. That didn't change based on who was sitting in the White House. So I would assume they have the exact same perspective that they've always had. There's a commander-in-chief. Yes, sir. You give best military advice, and then yes, sir. That's how you do it. So that'll be their perspective, I'm sure.
That's a diplomat here.
What's that?
That's very diplomatic.
But in actuality, it's exactly how I felt in the Pentagon. You get the opportunity in the Pentagon to disagree, but at some point you're a military organization and somebody gives an order, and you have two choices: resign or say I'm going to carry it out. That's your choices, right?
Yeah, but it doesn't match with your name, Grenade.
So back to, it can sit on the table, you can hold the pin, you can hold it in your hand, you put the pin back in. We'll just leave the pin in. How's that? We'll just leave the pin in. We've gone a while. I was going to leave you guys with a couple of final thoughts. Are you good?
What time is it? Yeah, a few more minutes.
Okay.
Any last questions?
Yeah, any last
very,
questions?
very good.
We have two here.
Summarize it.
One of the brother-in-law and one mine. About that last part that you talked about, you have two options: resign or yes, sir. In any moment during your career, do you had a moment where you had a lot of thoughts about it, about saying, okay, that's like my limits, I'm getting over my limits, I'd like to resign because I don't want to do this? You
Nope.
have this kind of moment?
Not even close.
Okay.
Not even close. You get inside the Pentagon, you get opportunities to dissent. You get the opportunity to, at least when I was in the Pentagon, I never felt like I hadn't had my chance, at my level at least, to say that I disagreed. And so it's different at very senior levels, I'm sure. But I think from my experience in the Pentagon, you got the chance to dissent. But there comes a moment in time where somebody has to make a decision. You just can't keep talking about it. You actually got to do the mission, right? And so, yeah.
And the other question is from his brother-in-law. He's saying here that he met a few helicopter drivers around here, and they complain a lot about back pain. And
None.
He's asking about your opinion. If you think it's more, how can I say, disgustante?
If it wears you out.
If it wears you out more than a plane, for example.
Yeah,
and how does your back talk to you about their pain?
My back is is actually very good, thankfully. Of all the problems that are wrong with me, my back is not one of them. I don't know how it does in a plane because I don't have the experience to compare it to, obviously. But I do think the pounding is one of the things, right? But more, I think, where it shows up with me, my helicopter impact is the ringing in my ears that I have. There's never quiet. In fact, the worst that it is when it's quiet. Because when it's quiet, all I hear is the ringing in my ears.
Tem zumbido constante.
And if you want to make it really bad, you want to put on a pair of Bose noise-canceling headphones and drown out all the rest of the sound so that you can just hear the screaming in your ears. That's the part that gets me the most. And I don't know whether I wore hearing protection and we have the helmets, and I don't know where that comes from, whether it's just old age or it was much more tied to being an aviator and being in a helicopter. I mean, it's definitely loud in a helicopter all the time. So I don't know.
What else? You said you had a lot of health issues.
Well, I'm not going into all of them here.
Okay.
Okay, Mario.
Just a silly question to finish, just a simple one. You've been having a lot of travel experience going around the world and all that. What is your favorite cuisine and what is your favorite Brazilian food? Since you've been working with him for a few years.
So if I was gonna pick my favorite place to eat in Brazil, it'll say a little bit about the cuisine. So we stay at the Melia Hotel, the Melia, however you guys pronounce that, right?
Oh.
You know the gas station that's right there?
Yeah.
Got kind of a sordid history, right?
Yeah.
So I've heard. I like their hamburgers.
Okay.
And I'm not normally a hamburger kind of guy, but obviously down here, anything you can put on a barbecue grill and cook is my favorite cuisine. Same as it is in Texas when I'm there.
To this him too, don't like it.
Yeah. One of the things he asked me to do, he said, wrap it up, some words of wisdom. I'm gonna leave you with 3 thoughts. I have a book in my head, and the book is 10 life lessons from the right seat of a Huey. And when you fly a helicopter, the aircraft commander's in the right seat, right? You're the person in charge of the helicopter. So 10 life lessons from the right seat of a Huey. So I'm gonna give you 3. And the first one's probably the most important thing as a pilot. It's situational awareness. You have to have situational awareness. We like to say in the military, war's tough, it's tougher if you're stupid. Life's tough. It's tougher if you're not paying attention, right? So situational awareness. Be involved, be present, be there, and know what's going on around you. Not just in everyday life, or not just when the situation is challenging, but in everyday life. You don't know when the car's coming through the intersection and gonna hit you broadside. You don't know, right? You gotta be situationally aware all the time. The second thing, in the helicopter we have a great big windscreen, we call it, right? Where we look out you would call it the windshield of your car, we call it the windscreen. And then I have windows up here, and I have windows down here, and I have windows out there. You know what a helicopter doesn't have? A rear view mirror. Doesn't have a rear view mirror. And have you ever wondered in your car, your rear view mirror is this big?
Yeah.
And your windshield is this big?
Mm-hmm.
Life happens in the windshield, not in the rear view mirror. The rear view mirror is for situational awareness. What did I do in the past? How do I learn from that in the future? But life is out in front of us, right? And I meet a lot of people who are looking in that tiny little thing of the rear view mirror, right? And so that's number 2. The last one is the idea that live life to the absolute fullest. you just don't know. My greatest fear is I'm going to die tomorrow, and I am not ready. And how much can I jam into every single day? How much can I fly? How much can I work? How much can I do whatever? It's that challenge to live your life every single day. I have a Hunter S. Thompson quote. If you've ever heard of Hunter S. Thompson, he's a writer, and he had a little bit of a checkered past. Alcohol, drugs, smoking, women, the whole nine yards, right? And in one of his books, he has a quote: "Life's goal isn't to arrive at the end with a perfectly preserved body. It's to show up in the end, come sliding in sideways in a giant cloud of dust, all used up, screaming, 'Wow, what a ride.'" So every single day, live like it's wow, what a ride, right? We only get one shot at this. People say you only live once. I say you only die once. You live every single day, right? So thank you all. A huge honor to be here and chat with all of you. Great questions, and I'm happy to have been here and happy to have done this today.
So Pat, thanks a lot. We really appreciate. I think in these times when politics is kind of getting a little bit nasty, I really appreciate that you come here, you kind of represent your country, your military, and a lot of things you say to our Brazilian military during those meetings are also important. About looking at the flag, it's not just a job, you're doing something, it's important, you've got to focus. So I appreciate that you came here. Maybe this might get you in trouble. I hope not. I know your wife will see this later.
Yeah.
We didn't say make any difficult questions in that sense. So I really appreciate you came over. I think I talk a lot with my friends about my job, and we meet very interesting people. And so I really appreciate that you came over and you give a little bit of your view, and that they might meet someone different with a life experience. And that's one of the reasons I did this round tables, so that we can meet people who have different lives, different experiences, and that we can learn from this. Today in the internet, people just fight, no one learns. And so I really appreciate this chance. And also that I can share this with my friends, so they know a little bit, they can see a little bit of what we experience and what we've been working with. So really appreciate it, man. Thanks a lot, man.
Yep, thank you very much. To the interpreters, and you all that do the magic of being able to speak 2 languages, thank you very much. You're what makes this possible, right? So thank you all that helped out.
Isso aí, Roda número 51, obrigado. Desculpa aí quem não fala inglês online. A chance era para vir aqui, viu? Mas é isso aí, gente. Muito obrigado quem nos acompanhou e quem veio aqui também, gente. Muito obrigado. Boa noite.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. Very welcome.